The Criterion Collection has released these films, Brief Encounters and The Long Farewells, two films by Kira Muratova, courtesy of this Blu-ray edition. This is the two-disc Blu-ray edition, so one film per disc, plus accompanying supplements for each disc, and we'll talk about the supplements a little bit later in this video, but before we get to it, let me just talk briefly about the presentation. For purposes, I have removed the fold-out leaflet insert, which is part of this, which is included along with this release. We'll talk about the fold-out leaflet in a moment. But let me talk about the masters, because it says here in the leaflet, and I quote, "Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell are presented in the aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. These new 4K restorations undertaken by Studio Canal and the Criterion Collection were created from the 35mm original camera negatives. The monaural soundtracks were remastered from the 35mm original soundtrack negatives." So yes, I understand that I don't have the Studio Canal releases, but I understand that these films were also released, I think earlier this year or late last year, courtesy of Studio Canal. In a different part of the world. So, and in fact, the supplements too are credited to, or there's the Studio Canal logo as part of the supplements. So there's the Studio Canal connection. So we have, of course, here the undertaking by Studio Canal and the Criterion Connection, according to the leaflet here, of the 4K restorations for each of Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell, so with the monaural soundtrack. So I fully admit to having a very, very, very limited, next to nil expertise with respect to these films. I've never seen them in the theater projected, and so I don't know. My grasp on these films is incredibly shallow, and so I'm taking a lot of my cues from my sort of subjective feelings of the films, or my viewings of the films, courtesy of this Criterion Blu-ray disc set, and that goes for the image and the sound. So, my feeling is that there are a lot of contrasts, I would say, between sort of one, for instance, let's take Brief Encounters as an example. Let's say interior scenes that sometimes have a shadow or dark tone to them, that are also somewhat, or not somewhat, quite vividly counteracted by seemingly visually opposing shots of wide, bright spaces and open vistas, and sort of the open country road where two young women are walking down versus, say, the crowds of an inner urban city, or the inner urban settings, or cramped spaces, or wide open spaces, and sometimes the frames can themselves be purposefully off balance, so as the close-up might not be fully centered, but maybe off center. Ahead of a close-up might be not just in the quote unquote exact center of the film, but maybe in the bottom frame or the top frame, etc. So there's a lot of playfulness, one can say, and there's a lot of playful sort of delights in terms of the way that the film visual motifs weave and bob this way and that, I think, in a wonderfully poetic, expressive way. And so in that type of subjective manner, I would say that, again, my eyes and ears are already quite limited in terms of their ability to perceive, and perhaps their sort of sensory perceptive abilities are even more lulled and more nullified by my increasingly advanced age. So that my ability to catch things in terms of seeing things and hearing things might be incredibly impaired and limited already. But be that as it may, I finding myself with no complaints in terms of my subjective viewpoint and experience with these films, courtesy or via the presentations as I find them on the Criterion Collection releases for both films. I found them to be very smooth and engaging. I found them, there's a kind of of roughness to some of the, not all, but some of the sort of the fragmented rigidities that I think the visual structure inherently carries with it. But that is in no way an impediment to the viewing of the film. I think all on the contrary. Uh, that type of vitality and harshness, contradictory elements intermeshed into one, I think, are sort of fully realized, and there is a kind of vivid sharpness on display with the way this looks and sounds. So, all in all, I'm very pleased with how Brief Encounters looks, and how The Long Farewell looks, and how Brief Encounters sounds, and how The Long Farewell sounds. I don't have any comparative notes to make, and as I say, I don't have the Studio Canal releases directly, but I would assume that there would be maybe close to exact sameness, or very, very close in terms of similarity. And in any event, I'm very pleased with what I have in terms of the Criterion 2-disc set right here. So now let's turn our attention to the supplements, and as you can see, I have one of the 2 discs in the player right now, and the disc is of Brief Encounters. You can tell from the Blu-ray menu. There's an image here which is of 2 of the characters in the film Brief Encounters, one of which appears to be Kira Muratova, and then the title Brief Encounters written in English across the top there, and then we have the selection here in terms of the Blu-ray menu. And let me go down to the supplements, because when I press the supplements, again, I apologize for my poor presentation skills. It might be difficult to actually read the words as I have them in terms of my position in the camera here, and I apologize, but let me read it out here. We have 3 supplements accompanying this Blu-ray disc of Brief Encounters. So once again, there are 2 Blu-ray discs. The first Blu-ray disc has the film Brief Encounters, and then supplements, which is where I am right now. The first, and these are all, or the supplements here generally are, I understand, the Studio Canal supplements release, or the release supplements. So, but the first of which is Elena Gorfinkel, and we'll also have an Elena Gorfinkel discussion on the Long Farewell disc. But here we have a scholar, and I quote, "Scholar Elena Gorfinkel describes the life of Kira Muratova and the making of her first solo directorial effort, Brief Encounters, in this 2023 interview." This is really great. Solo directorial effort, because according to Elena Gorfinkel, there is, in terms of the life and times of Kira Muratova leading up to, or just prior to, Brief Encounters. In fact, it could be said that she has a filmography prior to Brief Encounters in terms of her collaborations with other filmmakers. But in terms of her first film that she directed, in terms of a quote-unquote solo directorial feature, this is oftentimes regarded, and I think according to Elena Gorfinkel, Muratova herself regarded Brief Encounters to be her first solo directorial debut feature film. So that's just one of many amazing pieces of information that one gets from listening to the great Elena Gorfinkel speak here about Kira Muratova's life and times, where she was born, where she grew up, and also how this has kind of an impact in terms of where she grew up in sort of the part in Romania, but then in order to study film, she moved to Moscow, and then became a filmmaker, artist. Of course, many things happened to her life along the way, and so Elena Gorfinkel does touch upon some aspects of the early biography of Kira Muratova. So again, for anyone who is interested in maybe exploring or getting to know more of the life and times of Muratova, but maybe are discovering Muratova for the first time, this is another great place to begin as a kind of primer or jumping off point in terms of the beginning of an exploration in terms of the life and times of Muratova. So it starts out very well. Oh, by the way, this Elena Gorfinkel discussion, it's a one-on-one interview with her. It's approximately 23 minutes. And so then it goes a little bit into the script of Brief Encounters, and originally the script Leonid Zhukovsky, and what the the maybe the impetus of the story was, but in the hands of Muratova, it kind of uh, Muratova was very much injecting a number of her sort of touches to the film, and thus it became the film directed by Muratova, that is Brief Encounters. One of the interesting aspects that's brought up by Elena Gorpinkel here, or everything is fascinating. One example of which is the reasoning, or the circumstances that led to Muratova herself appearing in the film Brief Encounters, because as we know, she appears in the film, and not it's quite a prominent role. It's one of the protagonists of the film, and so it's mentioned here why what the circumstances was for her appearing in the film here. So that is great as well, and we also have. Um, the discussion sort of a kind of a narrative structure, and how it has a kind of disparate structure that's very much mirroring the disparate nature of the trio of characters that are arguably the main characters of the film, which has a potential, as Gorfinkel argues, to set up an expectation of a love triangle. And indeed, perhaps the film, as I mentioned earlier, could be read in one way to be a kind of love triangle, but in fact, can be read in many different ways as well. So, and the differing roles of women in society, and Valentina as an example, in terms of her many roles and expectations vis-a-vis such roles, and also to the sort of the historical background of, in terms of Vysotsky, and his prominence as a musician, as a really popular musician, and Gorfinkel mentions here maybe. For those who might not know, he has the sort of Korean prominence akin to someone like, say, Bob Dylan in the United States, and so the fact that he carries with it that type of background to the role, in terms of his look and the bearded visage of him, and also his association with music and the guitar and his singing and the voice, it carries with it a lot of import that I think, as Gorfinko mentions, would not have gone unnoticed to contemporary film audiences of the day. So there's a kind of drift and spirit that then Gorfinko very cleverly suggests the possibility to, or possible reading, in terms of a cultural, countercultural drift and spirit that has a political wind to it. So that was really wonderful. And two, the idea of carrying on in terms of spatial dimensions, and time, and temporal dimension, and how these are almost shifted and displaced, and almost in a kind of a puzzle-like way, but not in a way that it renders the film utterly inscrutable to the audience, but on the contrary, it actually leads itself more into a further understanding about who these people are. And so this idea that Gorfinkel mentions is notion of expectation and idiosyncratic will, and I think that's the idea of sort of the individual will, and how that might sometimes be found to be at odds with sort of externally imposed expectation. Take Valentina as an example, and Gorfinko also mentions how this film, maybe in the context of Muratova's body of work writ large, might be seen to be quote unquote conventional when considering other Muratova films, but there's the argument to be made that it's still very experimental, as I mentioned, in terms of its handling of space and time, and sort of dissonance, which Gorfinkel uses here to great effect. So this is a great example of an introduction to the world of Muratova, and also the relevance of the biography to leading up to and then including Brief Encounters. So this this conversation with Gorfinkel is approximately 23 minutes. We will see more of Elena Gorfinkel in the some of the supplements in the second disc, but before we turn to that, let us go to Isabel Jacobs here. And the scholar Isabel Jacobs offers a thematic and stylistic analysis of Brief Encounters in this 2023 interview. So here's another discussion, a really great scholarly discussion, approximately 15 minutes. This is also a Studio Canal type of, this is also, there's a Studio Canal supplement. Uh, and here, we have more discussion of the sort of the background and biography, the early life of Muratova. But here, there's a point to be made about how there could be also something to be said about a kind of maybe vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, a kind of outsider status that Muratova might have been carrying in terms of where she was born, where she came from Romania on the one hand, but then she moved to Moscow to pursue her film studies, and that kind of maybe described in a kind of extreme way, a kind of displacement, also maybe as it's mentioned here, maybe almost like an outsider status, which itself I think carries a lot of import if we think about or look at her films like Brief Encounters through that lens. It adds, I think, another dimension to the way we might sense characters in that world to be themselves, maybe seemingly within the environments, but still very much, excuse me, on their own and maybe displaced, which leads to further, I think, character study and insight. So that's a really powerful observation to be made here. Also, too, in the flow of history and in the film and how. Muratova came into sort of filmmaking prominence, and she grew up and came into filmmaking prominence into the 50s and 60s. And prior to or before Perestroika, she became prominent in the late 60s into the 1970s. And how this coincides with aspects of the history of the Soviet Union, and how this may have had an effect on the state's or the government's view of her films, which led to many decisions involving the shelving of her films, the inability for her films to be seen, except maybe in very limited circles, but never given wide releases due to a state decision based upon viewing of and decisions based upon the content of the films, at least how they perceived it. So that came in terms of the thaw or the ability to see her films again. That came upon Perestroika, but it was remarked here by it's remarked here and also by Gorfinkel elsewhere as well about how during this period of the films being shelved or being altered, and sometimes the negative would be destroyed. And actually, Muratova herself would be mentioning this in another one of the supplements. Sometimes the negative would be destroyed of the scenes that were excised or cut, such that when it came time for her films to be re-released many years later, and people were saying, "Oh, we should put the scenes that were excised back into the film to observe the way in which you originally intended the film." Well, Muratova would oftentimes, or depending on the circumstance, would say, "Well, I can't do it because the actual original negative was destroyed." So there's a lot of, for lack of a better phrase, terrible treatment that was to be had. And Muratova, in terms of Muratova's films, which might have affected how much public exposure and how much people were able to know or not know about Muratova, maybe also relative to other contemporary filmmakers. But in any event, her films are not only being re-released or have been back in circulation to a certain degree, but now also getting restorations as well, thanks to Studio Canal and Criterion Collection and the like. So, and also to some details about some of the other stars. Nina Arsenova, who was Nadia, who is one of the biggest stars of Soviet cinema. This being cited as being her screen debut, as it were, and one of the main characters of the film, and also to the use of song. Maxim being another one of the characters, the male character. And this the idea of singing and song, and one of the lines that he sings, nothing is sacred, how that also has a kind of socio-political bent or commentary to it. Also, too, Jacob does so well is mentioning aspects of the dialect and how the rural dialect might be different from sort of the dialect of the urban center, and also to mention by Gorfinkel and others as well here about the Isabel Jacobs here about the urban centers in Odessa, and how this is also in many ways a kind of mixture of cultures, uh, 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 and that's also reflective of a kind of um, the state of being, perhaps a kind of mixture, but also varying perspectives. That also could be said to be mirroring or paralleling, kind of a multiple perspective approach of the storytelling modes of brief encounters. So, and also too, it's mentioned this idea of gender roles, and the phrase that's used here by I think very well is a quote unquote double burden. The notion about maybe a kind of critique of what history might have yearned to be a kind of idealized view of liberation and gender roles, and the kind of women being able to find a sense of equality, at least a kind of on a macro level, or maybe from the history book's perspective. But maybe if we look at brief encounters as a type of critique of that, we see, for instance, Valentina as being someone who is quote unquote imposed by a quote unquote double burden. That's one way of reading it. In other words, the expectation not only to be a working professional and be very busy with her time in terms of being a working professional, but also the expectation of needing to or being expected to do all the housework and the chores and cleaning the dishes and the house and the other aspects of domestic life. So that type of that could be said to be not just not liberation, but perhaps burdensome, which in fact could be said to be a critique of this type of idealized notion. And this, I think, reading can also, or this critique, this reading as a critique can also be found in a potential reading of The Long Farewell, which is also mentioned as a possibility. So this is another great perspective, Isabel Jacobs' perspective. Really well done. The two perspectives here are absolutely dazzling and completely illuminating. So please check this out. As I said, this is approximately 15 minutes. And then we have Kira Muratova herself. And it says here, and I quote, "Director Kira Muratova sheds light on the public reaction to her films Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell, as well as her cinematic philosophy in this 1991 interview conducted for the French television program Cinema. So this is approximately, it's about not that long, it's about 5 minutes or so, I think. And we see Muratova again in 1991. And she's asked questions like what is cinema, and what is the state of sort of modern cinema and modern filmmaking. And I mentioned the idea of the negative of the film with one of her films, and how the sort of scenes were excised when it was under scrutiny from the government, and then when those excise scenes were asked to be put in, she couldn't because the negative was destroyed. Or so. So that's an example of the sort of the harsh treatment of her art and her films in many ways. And so this the reemergence of her films and the kind of critical appraisal came about perestroika and beyond. But before that, it was like she was persona non grata in a cinematic sense, and not being able to find furtherance in her film career, unfortunately. So so there was a lot of hardship that she faced as an artist throughout many of the early years of her career. And she meant there's an interesting way in which she talks about American cinema and French cinema as well. So, which is an interesting comment that's made to the French television program Cinema. And that's, I think, at the tail end of the film discussion here. So we get Kira Muratova herself. Her voice as an artist. Of course, we see Kira Muratova, her image and her voice and her demeanor in her performance in Brief Encounters, but here we see her one-on-one as it goes in terms of this snippet. It's 5 minutes. It's not that long, but there's packed full of information. It's together with the disc of Brief Encounters, but it could be said to be associated with Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell. But in any event, please check this out if you can. It is absolutely worth it. And so now I have removed the disc for Brief Encounters, and I've put into the player the disc for The Long Farewell. So it's the second of the two discs. And the reason I've done so is, well, first of all, we can see the art that's used for the Blu-ray disc menu, together with Long Farewell against the or along the top here, the right-hand side of the frame. It's a very apropos image, I think, taking into context the story of the film. But we go to the Blu-ray menu, and then we scroll down. Again, I apologize for the poor presentation skills that I'm displaying here, as always. I hope you can forgive me. But I press supplements, and I have here two supplements here again. Elena Gorfinkel and Isabel Jacobs. So first is Elena Gorfinkel, and it says here, and I quote, "In this 2023 interview, scholar Elena Gorfinkel tells the story behind the making of The Long Farewell, as well as the ensuing controversy that sidelined Kira Muratova's directorial career for several decades." This is another great discussion from Elena Gorfinkel, again, continuing what we saw with the first disc's supplement, Brief Encounters supplement. So this discussion with Elena Gorfinkel is approximately 29 minutes. And she, again, speaks about here now the background, genesis, excuse, the genesis of the film, the long farewell, and talking about how the script was already about, it was already in existence. The script written by Natalia Razantseva, but that Muratova, due to certain circumstances involving the initial plans for making the film, according to Gorfinkel, Muratova ended up becoming the director for the film. And there were some certain changes that were made along the way. I think the title was going to be a different title. And there was also the idea of the focus on the coming of age story aspect of the film. But when, according to Gorfinkel, when Muratova came onto the scene to direct the film, there was also emphasis to be added or in parallel to that coming of age story, which is still present in the film, of course. But there was also with the Muratova's participation came also what is described here to be an emphasis to focusing or more focus on the mother's story of the film. And the idea here of the mother, the story of a mother who cannot let go, even though there are various signs perhaps that point to her having no choice but to let go or needing to let go. Even, especially where circumstances seem to be leading to that conclusion, even though she personally and emotionally may not want to go into that territory. We have here an interesting display here, for instance, of the different acting styles that are on display. So we have, as I said, the mother and son dynamic. Zenaida Sharko, who plays the mother, Yevgenia, according to, or as described by Elena Gorfinkel here, she has in terms of her acting performance and style, a kind of and I mean this in a very, this is meant to be, I think, very much in keeping with the character herself, a kind of wide and loud, very theatrical style, which I think is, as I say, very much in keeping with the tone and mood of the character that she's portraying. A really effective performance, really great on the one hand. And then we have the son, Sasha, Oleg Vladimirsky's performance, whose performance is described here as being subtle and somewhat subdued, perhaps also a reflection of a different kind of acting method and style, but also perhaps a reflection of where we might say the son, character of Sasha, might be finding himself vis-a-vis, again, the relationship with the mother. So again, the acting performances or the styles also parallel what we might say is sort of the story structure itself. It's described here also as a kind of take on the phrase used here, I think, very effectively is maternal melodrama. And another example from elsewhere, Stella Dallas comes to mind. And kind of from the viewpoint of the mother, there's also, again, much like Brief Encounters, there's a thumbs up. Again, I apologize. These thumbs up images come every so often. I apologize. But the issue of the father, or the matter of the father, and sort of the presence of the father, There's a kind of mother-son relationship mediated through a third party, that being the father here, who is a away archaeologist, and that therefore that hinges. So the mother-son relationship hinges on the choice that the son is going to make, and that tends to bring the film into kind of melodramatic focus and also kind of tragic focus. So this is again very much in keeping with the sort of turbulent nature of their ever-changing nature of the mother-son dynamic. And to this has a kind of a sense of the sort of the purpose. Well, maybe purpose might be the wrong word, but a kind of uh, um, what is the role of motherhood here, and at least in this specific context, excuse me. There might be this idea of an ambivalence there. And maybe one might reach maybe a cynical conclusion that there might be little room or little place for the mother in this context, which might lead more towards a reading of the film in a kind of tragic tone or tragic hue. And then also there is a way in which Muratova, much like in Brief Encounters, like in other films, will be handling space and time. Repetition is also, I think, as Gorfinko mentions, emphasizes the notion of time and things staying as they are, a kind of stagnant aspect of time, but also something that might be somewhat inevitable. Repetition and montage becomes also a way in which to display in a cinematic form diffraction or dissonance or separation. And also the use of space and the way, for instance, that trees and environment and plants in particular are used sometimes in the foreground to almost create a maybe almost an otherworldly sort of set decor in a lot of the scenes that have a sort of snippet-like quality. Again, very much fractal in nature, so it's quite wonderful. So it's a wonderful description that's used here: a refusal of traditional structure, which I think is very apropos. And it's described here as being one of Muratova's best films, and also to how Muratova really considered editing and montage and using multiple takes as a means of repeated action, etc., and also to sort of the tactile nature of life, and to how this film, in terms of how this was treated by the state censors, it was rather maligned in that way, unfortunately, and shelved for many years, and it created an unfortunate reputation in terms of Muratova, and a kind of an unfortunate inability for Muratova to work as much as she wanted to and she could have, being the great artist that she was. So it really affected her career in that way up until a certain point, some years later. In terms of a change in the political winds, as it were, led to, among other things, a newfound discovery or rediscovery of her films, one should say. But still, her career was undoubtedly affected by the treatment of The Long Farewell. But thankfully for us, in 2024, we are still able to watch this film. So well done for this wonderful discussion from Elena Gorpinko. Again, this is, what did I say, approximately 29 minutes, so it's well worth it. Please check it out if you can. And then Isabel Jacobs again speaks, and it says here, scholar Isabel Jacobs offers a thematic and stylistic analysis of The Long Farewell in this 2023 interview. This is approximately 16 minutes. This is also, it seems, carried, it's Studio Canal. I like the expression here described as a kind of surrealist film. It certainly is. And also, it was a film that was unfortunately shelved for many years, as was mentioned. But also, like the previous discussion, this is described as being one of Muratova's best films ever. In terms of the description of Odessa, sort of the city landscape, as being there was a certain circumstance involving an epidemic of cholera, which led to a delay of production of some time, and also in terms of the story and setting, this idea of depicting the mother perhaps through some lens of interpretation as being quote unquote irresponsible, and a not too optimistic viewpoint of her position, which might have been one of the reasons cited for the state censors ultimately shelving this, and also thus deeming maybe the criticism, the quote unquote official criticism, being that the film was an example of bourgeois decadence. There is, of course, at the heart of the film, The Long Farewell, a sense of despair, a sense of absurdity, as is mentioned here, uh, and a lot of interesting aspects of sound and sort of sonic, maybe dissonance as well. The example that is raised here, the use of phone calls, phone calls that are said, for instance, from the son to the father, and how listening into the phone calls becomes a really key plot point of the film at a key moment. And also there's a table scene or a meal scene that involves a lot of voices, perhaps at once, what's described as a symphonic mix of voices, which is also very much emblematic in a sonic way of maybe the different fragments or different ideas that we have seen visually on cue in the various sort of multiple perspectives, and also in cinematic form in the Long Farewell, as well as the previous film. Um, and it's this idea of maturity on the one hand and the coming of age story on the other, and there are some really great moments of charged eroticism using very, very interesting and straightforward, simple technique and design. There's a scene involving the petting of a dog and close-ups on hands, but there's a way in which this itself, because of certain things that could and could not be shown due to censorship considerations, meant that moments of, say, charged eroticism needed to be shown in a very creative way, and that's an example that's cited here quite convincingly. And also this idea of repetition. I think Warhol is referenced here in an interesting way. It's interesting that well, Jacobs mentions Warhol. I think in the background of the other Gorfinkel discussions, there's I think a book on Warhol, if I'm not mistaken. So that's an interesting coincidence that's made here, and so. This is another great discussion. It covers certain similar ground, but also approaches it from a different perspective. So you're getting, I think, a wide range of different possible interpretations from watching these two great scholars talking about it in a great way. It's fantastic. So please check this out if you can. It's approximately, what did I say, 16 minutes. So please check it out if you can. And that ends the supplements for The Long Farewell, and also my earlier discussion on the supplements for Brief Encounters. So as far as I can tell, there are no other supplements. There are no commentary tracks or anything like that. I'm always a fan of commentary tracks in general. It would have been nice to have seen a commentary track for this film and for the previous film. And of course, it would have been great to see other film discussions or supplements here and the like. But so maybe I would have loved to have seen more supplements and more commentaries or discussions. But I don't want that to sound like I am in any way negating the greatness of these supplements that we already have, because I don't want to do that, because I don't want to, because I'm not. They're great and wonderful, as I've tried to suggest. So if you're looking for a primer in the world of and the background of Muratova, in the context, anyway, of Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell, and these are two great scholars on both discs. You can watch their discussions, as well as Muratova's discussion on the first disc from the director herself. And so let us now round out our conversation with respect to this great Criterion release of the two Muratova films, Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell. And so let me now refer to the leaflet, the fold-out leaflet. It is a fold-out leaflet, not a staple booklet, so I don't like the fold-out leaflet. I wish it could have been the staple booklet, but there are, of course, very excellent points to accompany this fold-out leaflet. For instance, the picture motif that we can see also that is adorning, or that are the picture motifs that are adorning the the liner notes here, which is very much akin to what we have here. I should point out the cover art design. I love this collage type, again, fragmented, fractal pieces that seem to be jagged and maybe dissonant, which I think can be said to be a running motif or a part of the commentary with regard to describing these films of Muratova. So really quite excellent indeed. And so I should point out the production in terms of art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, and designer this is La Moutique, and art production coordinator William Braze, print production artist Craig Phillips, art assistant Julie Sussman. And another great thing is the essay by Jessica Kang, which is called Restless Moments, excuse me. This is a great catalog of the film's brief encounters and the long farewell. Oh, I should say too, in addition to that, there's also brief write-ups on each of the films. The long farewell here on this page, which is colored in black, and then the brief encounters, which is on this page, colored in a sort of white or grayish white. So there's a write-up on each of the films, a sort of brief description of the plot, and then the Restless Moments essay, which is very far-reaching and really excellently worded and written. Again, my strong recommendation is to watch the two films first, and then you can read this essay, Restless Moments, which does go into some further detail about, Muratova's subsequent or career subsequent to these two films is touched upon in some of the supplements, in the supplements that we find on the discs themselves, but it's also touched upon very well in this essay. So please check this out if you can. It is another wonderful, brilliant essay touching upon these two films. And I should point out that the discs are the two Blu-ray discs. They are stacked like this. I have the long farewell up front here, and then brief encounters here on the bottom. They don't touch, so it's one of these stacked system cases, and there's nothing, there's a white background in terms of the interior or inner sleeve portion of the sleeve itself, and then there we go, and then there we have the insert, and it goes like that. And there is the, oops, sorry, there I should point to, this is the front, oops, this is the front, and then this is the back here. There's a little bit, there I should remove that, there we go. So there is the sense of the physical media packaging, and I think, sorry, there should be a little bit, I apologize. Sometimes the plastic is, there we go, and then there's a little bit of plastic that was not removed, but now it's removed. I apologize for that. So there is, in a nutshell, I suppose, there are my thoughts with respect to these two brilliant films, Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell. So the Muratova films. So please check this out if you can. This is a wonderful release. You're getting two films together in this package, and they're each in their own way dazzling and mystifying and truly bold and defiant and very much eye-catching and truly soul-stirring and brilliant examples of the films, of the work and the poetry of Kira Muratova. So please check these out if you can. It's definitely worth it. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Brief Encounters, including Long Farewell, including other films by Muratova if available, including other films in the Criterion Collection, and beyond. So until we meet again, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.